There is a quiet mistake many people make without realizing it. They believe that the more they share, the more they will be understood. But over time, the opposite begins to happen. The more you reveal your plans, your emotions, and your thoughts, the easier you become to read, and the easier you are to influence. Without noticing, you start shaping yourself based on how others respond. You speak too soon, react too quickly, and look outward for validation instead of inward for clarity. And in doing so, you slowly lose your sense of control. The Stoics understood something simple but powerful. Not everything needs to be expressed. Some things are meant to be held, observed, and strengthened in silence. So ask yourself this: how much of your power are you losing simply because you reveal too much? Most people believe that weakness is something obvious, something visible in failure or hesitation. But in reality, it often appears in much quieter ways, in the small, repeated moments where you give away parts of yourself without even noticing. Every time you speak about a plan before it is formed, every time you react instantly to something that disturbs you, every time you look to others to confirm what you already feel, you are slowly leaking your own sense of stability. And the problem is not that you are doing something wrong on the surface. It is that you are doing it unconsciously, without awareness of the cost. You might think that sharing your thoughts makes you honest, that expressing your emotions makes you real, that explaining yourself makes you understood. And to some extent, these things are true, but only when they are done with intention and control. Without that control, they become habits of exposure, patterns that make you easier to read, easier to predict, and therefore easier to influence. And once that pattern is established, you begin to lose something far more important than privacy. You lose your center, the quiet place within you that is not shaped by the reactions of others. The Stoics believed that the mind should be a place of order, not something constantly reacting to external events. And yet most people live the opposite way. They allow every comment, every opinion, every minor inconvenience to enter and disturb their state. They speak as soon as they feel. They respond as soon as they are triggered. And in doing so, they give the world direct access to their inner condition. They become transparent in a way that does not create connection, but instead removes depth. Because when everything is visible, nothing feels grounded or deliberate. This is how power is lost. Not in a single dramatic moment, but in a series of small leaks. A careless sentence here, an unnecessary reaction there, a need for reassurance that pulls your attention outward again and again. Over time, these small actions shape how others perceive you, but more importantly, they shape how you perceive yourself. You begin to depend on feedback, on acknowledgement, on subtle signs that you are accepted or approved. And when those signs are absent, you feel uncertain, not because you lack ability, but because you have trained yourself to look outside instead of within. Consider how often you explain yourself when it is not required, how often you speak just to fill silence, how often you reveal your next move before you have even taken the first step. Each of these moments feels harmless, even natural, but together they create a pattern of exposure, a habit of giving more than is necessary. And the more you give in this way, the less grounded you become, because your thoughts are no longer held long enough to mature. Your emotions are no longer observed long enough to be understood, and your actions are no longer guided by clarity, but by impulse. The Stoic approach is not about becoming closed off or distant. It is about becoming intentional, about choosing what to express and when, about allowing space between feeling and action, about recognizing that not every thought deserves a voice, and not every emotion requires a reaction. When you begin to practice this, something changes. You start to notice how often you were speaking out of habit rather than purpose. How often you were reacting to maintain an image rather than to act with clarity. And slowly, you begin to reclaim that space within yourself. This is where real strength begins, not in controlling the world around you, but in reducing the ways it can control you. And that starts with awareness, with seeing the subtle ways you have been giving yourself away, the unnecessary words, the impulsive reactions, the quiet need to be seen and validated. Once you see it, you cannot ignore it. And once you begin to hold back just a little, to pause just a moment longer, to keep certain things within instead of offering them outward, you will feel a difference. A kind of steadiness that does not depend on what happens next. You are not becoming less open. You are becoming more grounded. You are not hiding yourself. You are learning to contain yourself. And in that containment, there is a quiet form of power, one that does not need to announce itself, one that is not easily shaken, and one that allows you to move through the world without constantly giving pieces of yourself away. There is a natural urge in most people to speak about what they are about to do, to announce their intentions as a way of making them feel real, as if saying something out loud gives it weight and meaning. And for a brief moment, it does. You feel a sense of progress, a subtle satisfaction, as if you have already taken a step forward. But this feeling is often an illusion, because the energy that should be directed toward action is instead spent on expression, and what remains is not momentum, but a quiet reduction in urgency. The Stoics approached action differently. They did not rely on words to validate their direction. They relied on discipline, on repetition, on quiet execution that did not require attention or acknowledgement. They understood that a plan spoken too early becomes fragile, exposed to opinion, doubt, and distraction, not only from others, but from your own mind. Because once something is shared, it invites reflection, comparison, and expectation. And these things can weaken your focus before the work has even begun. When you announce your plans, you also begin to tie your identity to them in a premature way. You start to feel as though you must live up to what you have said, not because it aligns with your purpose, but because you have created an image that now needs to be maintained. And this subtle pressure shifts your attention away from the process itself. You are no longer simply doing the work. You are managing how the work will be perceived. And in that shift, clarity is lost, replaced by a quiet tension that interferes with consistency. There is also another consequence that is less obvious but equally important. When you share your intentions, you expose them to the reactions of others. Some may support you, some may question you, and some may respond with indifference. And regardless of the response, your internal state begins to adjust. Encouragement may create overconfidence. Doubt may create hesitation. And indifference may create insecurity, all of which move you away from a stable, self-directed path and toward a fluctuating state shaped by external input. Acting in silence is not about secrecy for the sake of appearing mysterious. It is about protecting the integrity of your focus. It is about allowing your thoughts to remain undisturbed long enough to become actions, and your actions to repeat long enough to become results. When you remove the need to speak, you remove a layer of distraction, and what remains is a more direct relationship between intention and execution, one that is quieter, but far more reliable. The Stoic mindset values this kind of quiet progress, not because it looks impressive, but because it builds something real, something that does not depend on recognition. When you wake up each day and simply do what needs to be done, without announcing it, without seeking acknowledgement. You begin to develop a different kind of confidence, one that comes from evidence rather than affirmation. You know what you are capable of, not because others have told you, but because you have seen it in your own actions. There is a discipline in withholding words, in allowing your plans to exist without being spoken, in letting your efforts accumulate without being displayed. And at first, this may feel uncomfortable because you are removing a familiar source of feedback. You are no longer receiving immediate validation, no longer sharing your progress in a way that invites response. But in that absence, something important begins to form. A stronger connection to your own standards. A clearer sense of direction that is not easily influenced. Over time, the results of this approach become visible, not because you have talked about them, but because they have taken shape through consistent effort. And when they do appear, they carry a different weight. They are not expectations. They are outcomes. And there is a quiet respect that comes from this, both from others and from yourself, because what has been built was not dependent on attention, but on commitment. To act in silence is to trust the process without needing to prove it in advance. It is to move forward without announcing each step, to allow your work to remain private until it is complete enough to stand on its own. And in doing so, you reduce distraction, protect your focus, and strengthen your ability to follow through, not because you said you would, but because you chose to, again and again, without the need for an audience. Most people do not lose control in dramatic moments. They lose it in small, repeated reactions, in the instant reply, the careless complaint, the quick surge of frustration that feels justified in the moment, but leaves a trace behind. And over time, these reactions form a pattern, one where the external world quietly dictates the internal state, where a comment can disturb your mood, a delay can create irritation, and a minor inconvenience can shift the direction of your entire day, not because the event itself is powerful, but because the response to it is unexamined. The Stoics understood that emotion is not the enemy, but the absence of awareness is. They did not aim to suppress feeling, but to create space around it, to observe it without immediately becoming it. Because the moment you are fully consumed by an emotion, you are no longer choosing your actions. You are reacting from impulse. And in that state, your behavior is no longer aligned with your values, but with whatever happens to trigger you in that moment. Consider how often you complain, not always out loud, but internally, a quiet resistance to what is happening, a subtle narrative that something should be different, that things are unfair, inconvenient, or not aligned with your expectations. And while this may seem harmless, it reinforces a mindset where your peace depends on conditions, where you can only remain steady if everything unfolds the way you prefer. And since life rarely follows that pattern, you are left in a constant cycle of subtle dissatisfaction. Complaining does not solve the problem. It anchors your attention to it. It magnifies what is wrong without moving you toward what can be done. And more importantly, it shapes your identity in a quiet way. You begin to see yourself as someone affected by circumstances rather than someone who can respond to them with clarity. And this shift is not obvious at first, but over time, it erodes your sense of agency, replacing it with a dependence on external conditions for internal stability. Anger follows a similar path. It often feels like strength, like a justified reaction to something that crosses a line. But when it is uncontrolled, it reveals the opposite. It shows that your state can be altered by something outside of you, that your reactions can be predicted and triggered, and once that pattern is visible, it can be used against you, not only by others, but by your own habits. because each time you react without pause, you reinforce the same pathway, making it easier for the next reaction to occur. The Stoic approach is not to eliminate anger or frustration, but to delay the moment of response, to create a gap between what happens and what you choose to do. In that gap, there is awareness, and in awareness, there is choice. This is where control exists. Not in forcing yourself to feel nothing, but in refusing to act on the first impulse, in allowing the emotion to rise, to be seen, and then to settle before it determines your behavior. This practice requires discipline because the initial reaction is often strong. It demands expression. It seeks immediate release. But if you can hold it for even a few seconds, if you can pause instead of react, you begin to weaken its hold. You realize that the feeling is temporary, that it does not define you, and that you are not required to follow it wherever it leads. And over time, this repeated pause becomes a habit, one that replaces reactivity with intention. There is also a quiet strength in composure, in remaining steady when others expect a reaction, not because you are indifferent, but because you are in control. This kind of presence changes how you move through the world. You are no longer pulled into every conflict, no longer drained by every inconvenience. You conserve your energy for what matters, and you act from a place of clarity rather than impulse. When you stop reacting automatically, you begin to see more clearly. You notice patterns in your own behavior. You understand what triggers you and why. And this understanding allows you to respond differently. Not perfectly, but more consciously. And with each small improvement, your sense of stability grows. Not because the world has changed, but because your relationship to it has. To master your emotions is not to become distant or cold. It is to become steady, to hold your center regardless of what happens around you, to feel without being overwhelmed, and to act without being controlled. And in that steadiness, there is a form of freedom that cannot be taken from you, because it does not depend on what happens, but on how you choose to respond. The way you speak is not just a way of exchanging information. It is a reflection of how you see yourself. And over time, it quietly shapes how others see you as well. Not through dramatic statements, but through small, repeated patterns in your tone, your wording, and the way you position yourself in conversation. Many people do not notice this because it feels natural, almost automatic. But within these habits, there are signals, subtle indications of confidence, uncertainty, self-respect, or the lack of it. One of the most common patterns is the habit of apologizing when it is not necessary. Phrases like "sorry to bother you," "sorry for asking," "sorry for speaking," are used so often that they seem harmless, even polite. But when repeated without cause, they begin to carry a different meaning. They suggest that your presence requires justification, that your voice needs permission, and over time, this creates a quiet imbalance where you position yourself as less certain, less grounded, and more dependent on the acceptance of others. The Stoics did not encourage arrogance or dominance, but they did value clarity and self-respect. They understood that your words should match your inner state, not compensate for a lack of it. When you speak, it should come from a place of calm certainty, not from the need to be approved or validated. And this does not require complex language or forceful delivery. It requires simplicity, directness, and the willingness to stand behind what you say without softening it unnecessarily. There is a difference between being respectful and diminishing yourself. Respect considers the other person, but self-respect includes yourself in that equation. It allows you to speak honestly without over-explaining, to express disagreement without hesitation, and to ask for what you need without framing it as an inconvenience. This balance is subtle, but once you become aware of it, you begin to notice how often you have been adjusting your words to avoid discomfort. Not because the situation required it, but because you were trying to maintain approval. Seeking approval in conversation often appears in small ways. Checking reactions, adjusting your tone to match others, or hesitating before expressing an opinion that might not be agreed with. These behaviors are not always obvious, but they reveal a reliance on external feedback, a quiet need to be accepted in order to feel secure. And when this pattern is repeated, it weakens your sense of independence, because your words are no longer guided by your own understanding, but by the anticipated response of others. The Stoic approach invites a different way of communicating, one that is grounded in internal alignment rather than external reaction. You speak because something is true, useful, or necessary, not because it will be liked, and you remain steady whether it is accepted or not. This does not mean you ignore feedback or become rigid. It means your sense of self is not altered by it. You listen, you consider, but you do not shift your position unless there is a reason grounded in understanding, not in pressure. There is also strength in saying less, in allowing silence to exist without filling it, in resisting the urge to explain every detail or justify every decision. Because when you speak only what is needed, your words carry more weight. They are not diluted by excess, and they reflect a mind that is not rushed or uncertain, but measured and deliberate. This kind of communication does not demand attention, but it naturally holds it, because it is rooted in clarity rather than noise. Over time, as you become more aware of how you communicate, you begin to notice subtle changes. You stop apologizing for things that do not require it. You express your thoughts with more ease, and you become less concerned with how your words will be received. Not out of indifference, but out of stability. You are no longer speaking to gain approval. You are speaking to convey what is real. And that shift, though quiet, changes the entire dynamic of your interactions. To communicate with self-respect is not to speak louder or more often. It is to speak from a place that is not dependent on others. It is to remain grounded in your own understanding while still being open to learning. And it is to recognize that your voice does not need to be justified, only aligned. Because when your words come from that place, they no longer weaken you. They become an extension of your stability. Calm, clear, and enough. In a world where sharing has become effortless and constant, there is a quiet pressure to make your life visible, to turn your experiences, your progress, and even your struggles into something that can be seen, acknowledged, and responded to. And while this may seem harmless, even normal, it slowly shifts your relationship with your own life. What was once lived for its own sake begins to be shaped by how it might appear to others. And in that shift, something essential is lost. A sense of privacy, of internal grounding, of living without the need to display. The Stoics understood that not everything within your life is meant for public view, not because it must be hidden, but because it holds value in being protected. Your thoughts, your plans, your resources, your personal struggles, these are not weakened by being kept private. They are strengthened because they are allowed to develop without interference, without comparison, without the subtle pressure of expectation that comes when others are aware of them. When you reveal too much about your personal life, especially things like your financial situation, your ambitions, or your difficulties, you invite perspectives that are not always helpful. Some people may admire, some may question, some may feel indifferent, and some may compare. And regardless of their intention, their reactions begin to influence how you see yourself. You may feel encouraged, discouraged, or subtly pressured to maintain an image that no longer reflects your reality. And over time, this can create a disconnect between what you are actually living and what you feel you must present. There is also a quiet cost in constant comparison. When your life is visible, it becomes part of a larger pattern where others measure themselves against you, and you measure yourself against them, even if you try not to. The exposure creates an environment where value is no longer internal, but relative, and this can disturb your sense of contentment, making you question progress that was once sufficient, or feel inadequate in moments that were once neutral, not because anything has changed, but because your frame of reference has shifted outward. The Stoic approach does not reject sharing entirely, but it encourages discernment, the ability to choose what is appropriate to express and what is better left within. This discernment is not based on fear, but on clarity, on understanding that some aspects of your life require space, time, and quiet development, and that exposing them too early or too widely can interfere with their natural progression, not through direct harm, but through subtle influence. Keeping your life private also creates a different kind of freedom. You are no longer performing, no longer shaping your actions around how they might be perceived. You begin to act more honestly, more directly, because there is no audience to consider. And this simplicity brings a form of peace, a sense that your life belongs to you, not to the reactions it generates. And in that space, your decisions become clearer, less affected by external noise, more aligned with your actual values. There is a quiet strength in not needing to display what you have or what you are going through, in allowing your progress to exist without constant acknowledgement, in letting your struggles be processed without public commentary. This does not isolate you, it stabilizes you. It creates a boundary that protects your focus and your sense of self. And within that boundary, you are able to grow without distraction, without the subtle pull to explain or justify every step. Over time, this way of living changes how you experience your own life. Moments become more complete because they are not divided between living and presenting. Your attention is not split between what is happening and how it might be perceived. And as a result, your awareness deepens. You notice more, you engage more fully, and you carry less of the tension that comes from managing an external image. To keep your personal life private is not to withdraw from the world. It is to move through it with a clearer sense of what belongs to you and what does not. It is to understand that not all value is meant to be displayed, and that some of the most important parts of your life gain their strength from being protected, held quietly, and allowed to unfold without interruption. And in that quiet, there is a form of stability that does not depend on recognition, but on the simple act of living in alignment with yourself. Words often feel light in the moment, easy to use, easy to forget. But over time, they shape something far more lasting. They shape how others understand you, and more importantly, how you understand yourself. Every sentence you speak carries intention, whether you are aware of it or not. And when those words are undisciplined, scattered, or dreh und bu impulse, they create a pattern of inconsistency, one where your speech no longer reflects clarity. But habit. Most people speak to fill space, to avoid silence, or to maintain connection. And in doing so, they say more than is necessary. They repeat themselves, they explain too much, or they shift into conversations that add little value, not because they intend to, but because they are uncomfortable with stillness. And this discomfort leads to excess, and excess weakens, meaning when words are used too freely, they begin to lose weight. They no longer carry precision, and as a result, they no longer carry authority. The Stoics approach speech with a different mindset. They believe that words should be used with care, not out of restraint alone, but out of respect for their impact. Speaking was not about expression for its own sake, but about alignment with what is true, necessary, and useful. Anything beyond that was considered unnecessary noise, something that distracted both the speaker and the listener from what actually mattered. One of the clearest examples of undisciplined speech is gossip, the tendency to speak about others in their absence, often in ways that are not constructive. It may feel like a way to connect, to share information, or to pass time, but beneath that surface, it carries a cost. When you speak about someone negatively, you are not only shaping how others see them, you are shaping how others see you. Because the listener cannot separate the content from the character. If you are willing to speak this way about someone else, they naturally assume you may do the same about them. And in that moment, trust begins to weaken. Gossip also pulls your attention away from what is within your control. Instead of focusing on your own actions, your own discipline, your own direction, you become involved in the lives and flaws of others. And this shift is subtle but significant. It reduces your sense of responsibility for your own path and replaces it with a passive observation of others, something that may feel engaging, but ultimately leads nowhere meaningful. Another common pattern is over-explaining, the need to justify your decisions, your beliefs, or your actions in detail, often in an attempt to be understood or accepted. But when you explain too much, you dilute your message. You introduce unnecessary complexity, and you signal uncertainty, not because your reasoning is weak, but because your delivery suggests that it needs reinforcement. And over time, this habit can reduce the clarity of your communication, making it harder for others to see your point without the excess that surrounds it. The Stoic approach to speech is grounded in simplicity and intention. You speak when there is something worth saying. You express it clearly, and you allow it to stand without unnecessary elaboration. This does not mean you avoid conversation or become distant. It means you bring awareness into how you use your words. You recognize when you are speaking out of habit rather than purpose, and you choose to pause instead, allowing silence to exist without immediately filling it. Silence, in this sense, is not emptiness. It is space, a space where thoughts can settle, where understanding can deepen, and where your words, when they do come, carry more weight because they are not rushed, not forced, but considered. And this kind of speech creates a different presence, one that is calm, deliberate, and grounded, not because it is loud or frequent, but because it is aligned. Over time, practicing discipline in speech changes how you relate to your own thoughts. You become more selective, more aware of what truly needs to be expressed and what can remain within. You begin to see that not every idea requires articulation. Not every observation requires commentary. Cease to peace, cease. And this awareness reduces mental clutter, creating a clearer internal state that is less reactive and more focused. To be disciplined in your words is not to restrict yourself. It is to refine yourself, to remove what is unnecessary so that what remains can be stronger, clearer, and more effective. It is to understand that speech is not just a tool for communication, but a reflection of your state of mind. And when that state is steady, your words naturally follow, becoming fewer, but more meaningful, quieter, but more precise. And in that precision, There is a quiet authority that does not need to assert itself. It simply exists. There is a quiet force behind many of the behaviors that weaken your sense of control, and it often goes unnoticed because it feels natural, even necessary. It is the desire to be recognized, to be acknowledged, to feel that what you do, say, or become is seen and approved by others. And while this desire is deeply human, when it becomes a need, it begins to shape your actions in ways that pull you away from yourself. You start to measure your value through reactions, through approval, through subtle signs that you are accepted. And without realizing it, your direction becomes dependent on something outside of you. This need for validation appears in small, familiar patterns, checking how others respond to what you say, adjusting your opinions to fit the environment, hesitating before expressing something that might not be well received, or seeking reassurance before taking action. Each of these moments may seem insignificant, but together they create a habit, a pattern where your sense of certainty is no longer self-contained, but influenced by feedback. And once that pattern is established, it becomes difficult to act freely, because every decision carries the weight of how it will be perceived. The Stoics recognized that true stability cannot come from external sources, because those sources are unpredictable, inconsistent, and often beyond your control. Praise may come one day and disappear the next. Approval may shift depending on circumstances, and what is valued by others may not align with what is right or meaningful. If your sense of worth is tied to these changing conditions, then your inner state will change with them, and you will find yourself constantly adjusting, not based on truth, but based on reaction. To step away from this pattern does not mean you reject all feedback or become indifferent to others. It means you change the role that feedback plays in your life. Instead of being a source of identity, it becomes a source of information, something you can observe, consider, and either accept or disregard without it defining you. This shift is subtle, but it restores a sense of independence. You begin to act from your own understanding rather than from the expectation of response. There is also a deeper layer to this. When you rely on validation, you are not only influenced by praise, you are also vulnerable to criticism, because the same mechanism that allows approval to lift you will allow disapproval to unsettle you. And this creates a fragile state, one where your confidence is not rooted in what you have done, but in how it has been received. And in that state, you are easily moved, not by reality, but by perception. The Stoic approach encourages a different foundation, one where your evaluation of yourself is based on your actions, your intentions, and your consistency, rather than on the reactions they produce. At the end of the day, the question is not whether you were praised, but whether you acted in alignment with what you believe to be right, whether you followed through on what you set out to do, whether you maintained clarity and composure in situations that tested you. These are measures that do not depend on anyone else. And because of that, they create a more stable form of confidence. Letting go of the need for validation also changes how you move through the world. You become less reactive, less concerned with being liked, and more focused on being clear. You speak when it is necessary, not when it will be approved. You act because it aligns with your purpose, not because it will be recognized. And this shift reduces a significant amount of internal noise. The constant evaluation, the subtle anxiety of how you are being perceived, begins to fade, replaced by a quieter, more grounded awareness. At first, this may feel uncomfortable, because you are removing a familiar source of reassurance. You are no longer receiving the same level of external confirmation, And without it, there may be moments of doubt, but these moments are part of the transition. They create the space for a different kind of confidence to develop, one that is not dependent on response, but on repetition, on the consistent practice of acting in alignment with your own standards. Over time, this way of living becomes more natural. You stop looking outward for permission. You stop measuring your worth through reaction, and you begin to trust your own judgment, not blindly, but steadily, with awareness and reflection. And in that trust, there is a form of freedom that cannot be easily disturbed, because it is not given by others, and therefore cannot be taken away. To release the need for validation is not to isolate yourself from the world. It is to engage with it from a place of stability rather than dependence. It is to understand that approval is not a requirement for action, and that your value does not increase or decrease based on how it is perceived. And when you truly see this, your actions become simpler, clearer, and more consistent, guided not by the shifting opinions around you, but by a steady sense of direction within.